Started. All right, welcome everyone to this session on making the case, grad school or employment. My name is Jody Hammer and I am the Career Services Specialist here at the NPCA, specifically working in the Global Reentry program. So that allows me to work with the evacuated Peace Corps volunteers and the other RPCVs that are out there who are working. I focus mostly on the career transitions. So working on these kinds of career webinars. Tonight is actually more of an education one, and I want to I'm going to introduce our panelists here in a moment, but before I do start, I do want to say that I also am an RPCV, having served in Ecuador from 94 through 97, and it was a life-changing experience, truly, which I think it is for most people. And I've joined NPCA, very fortunately was able to join NPCA just a few months ago. April 22nd was my first day here working in this capacity. And before that, I was working actually in Peace Corps headquarters, running their RPCV Career Center back at its old location. And so I'm thrilled to be here. Throughout my service and my time working with RPCVs, I've worked with a lot of evacuated folks. Obviously, never something quite to the extent of this massive global evacuation of all individuals. However, I definitely feel your pain for those of you who are going through it, and I know that you're very resilient and you will get through it. And hopefully this and some of the other sessions that we're offering will help you along your journey. So let's go ahead. And I want to introduce have the grad school panelists actually introduce themselves. So Stephanie, can you go ahead and start since you're first on the list there? That would be great.
Yep. Good evening, everyone. As you can see, it's evening here. I don't know about where you are, but good evening. Stephanie Wade here. I served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala from 2010 to 12. I currently live in Puerto Rico. After Hurricane Maria, there was a call to all federal employees. At the time, I was working for the Peace Corps as a recruiter. That's how I was able to get this lovely shirt. And so they did a call to all federal employees to help out because they just didn't have the manpower. And so, of course, I raised my hand. There's a need. I'm available. I'm going. Came here, never left. So it's definitely been a whirlwind moving to an area that was completely devastated by a disaster. But I mean, Peace Corps prepares you for things like that. So that's me. I'm currently working for Deloitte, assisting the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico in their grant management from FEMA. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you for allowing me to be here, Jody. Thank you for the invite. And I'm looking forward to the discussion.
You were muted. I assume I'm
so
next.
Sorry, Stephanie, if you can just go next, I'm sorry, Victoria, if you can go next, that would be great. Thank you so much.
No problem. Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria. I am an RPCV from Liberia. I served from 2016 to 2019. So I got back only in August. I've been spending this last year working as a yoga instructor and an online English teacher. I took my GRE in the fall, applied for lots of programs. I'm pursuing my master's in public health and social work, a dual program, but I am deferring. I have decided to defer for this year, and currently am applying for hopefully a federal government job in Colorado and establishing in-state tuition before I pursue those degrees next year.
Great. And Dustin.
Good evening, everyone. Happy to be here, Jody. Good to see you again. Good to see both. Stephanie, quick question for you. What office did you work at when you were a recruiter?
First the Atlanta office, but then they moved me to Chicago.
Okay, cool. All right. I was going to say I work with one of the old supervisors where I work now, so that's why I was asking. Sorry, Jody, I'm getting sidetracked. So Dustin.
That's all right.
Peace Corps response. So I was a response volunteer from 2012 to 13. I was one of the first non-RPCVs to serve in Peace Corps response, so that's why you don't see the other service there. Wonderful opportunity. Happy to talk about grad school. Grad school actually helped me qualify for Peace Corps response. I did a part-time social work program, so I have an MSW at Cal State Long Beach in Southern California while working full-time. So hoping to talk about that more now later in the presentation. And then I work now I'm a federal employee. I actually work with the Customs and Trade Office at CBP, and I work in trade policy, and I work as like a liaison with our partner government agencies. And prior to that, I worked at Peace Corps in recruitment for Peace Corps response and placement, and also performance reporting.
Great, wonderful. And then the fourth one I have listed here is participants, because I recognize that some of the folks on this call may actually be, they may already have degrees, and they may be listening in to maybe help either mentees or others. There were two other, I had such a great response to filling this one up with just, I'm really excited to have such great panelists that we have here. And we had even more who said, I'd be willing to do this. And I said, you know, I don't think I can fit more than 3 official ones, but in the event you want to hop on as a participant, you could certainly put some of your comments in the chat box, and you could certainly, you know, probably even unmute yourself at some point if you want to add commentary. So I'm not sure if Nathan is on or Kiara, but they may come on at some point and, you know, help with some of the, maybe answer some of the questions that are coming in, and they have unique experiences too. But I promise if we don't feature them today, we'll definitely feature them on another program, because we'll be doing a variety of these kinds of things. So everyone has their unique journey. So why don't we, thank you for introducing yourselves. I appreciate that. Why don't we, I'm going to share with you what our agenda looks like here. And my computer is stalling. I apologize profusely. It's very, it's very not really, it's sticking for a lot here. So in terms of the agenda for tonight, after introducing the panelists, I'm going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of going to grad school. And there really are pros and cons. It's not an easy decision to make, as I'm sure our panelists can all, you know, vouch for as well, right? It's one that you want to really make in a concerted way, where you know, weigh pros and cons and all of those kinds of things. So we'll talk a little bit about the, you know, the pros and cons very briefly, and then choosing your graduate school and degree, which can be important, and then decision making, like how do you decide, right? You know, doing, whether it's a cost benefit analysis, like taking all the factors, you know, into account. And then lastly, a little bit about funding sources, and then we'll open it up for general questions. But here's the thing, I don't want this to be a presentation. It's more of, as we go through these different points, I want to defer to some of my colleagues who might have, you know, my panelists who can weigh in with their own experience and such. And then please, I encourage you to drop your questions into the chat box. And for the panelists, anyone, you know, if you have insight on that and want to respond to it, that's fine. But I'll also be having folks feed me questions a little bit, and I'll be looking through the chat box as well as we go to see what other questions are coming up, because I really want this to be more of an informal Q&A, you know, addressing your questions. And I want to definitely get started because we were late in kind of getting started. So first we have a slide, just should you go to grad school? I mean, that is a huge question, right? And while there's nobody who can tell you yes, no, or, I mean, it's your decision. It's a personal decision, and it's a very important and big decision that can affect the rest of your life in many, many ways, for good and, you know, the opposite, you know, loans and things like that, it can. So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of pursuing a degree. So some of the pros I just have down here, you know, obviously I talk to a lot of people, and they say, well, yeah, increasing my competitiveness, that's how it helped me. It made me stand out. Now, I will say that here in DC, I've had a lot of people who've said to me, you know, they say, yeah, but everybody has, it doesn't really make you stand out. It seems like everybody in DC has a graduate degree. So you kind of get that, but it's almost where people are like, oh, it's almost like the bachelor's. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think depending on your field maybe and such as well, but there are certain jobs where it's required to have a master's degree. Sometimes a specific one is required, but a lot of times it's a master's or a master's in a related field. So it's not necessarily one field, but maybe many. You could probably make a case for one major fitting a lot of different kinds of jobs, right? And X years of experience, that kind of thing, right? So it can increase your earning potential, and in many ways, it certainly can. There are, and the reason I say the may increase your earning potential, not always. It depends. I just was talking to another career professional, and they were doing some research, and they really encouraged people to use, she encourages people to use salary.com do some research there on, like, you know, what the salaries are and that kind of thing, but looking at comparing graduate and undergrad. And for some majors, like, and the one that she gave as an example was accounting. Accounting seemed to, you know, accountants generally, as an undergraduate, they get a pretty job, you know, payment. They're kind of high on the end, if you will. But getting that master's has oftentimes not, according to salary.com, it doesn't necessarily pay off. You know, when you weigh in the cost that you pay for the degree, all of those kinds of things, and the amount of, you know, additional earnings that you have, for some degrees, it may make more sense than others. So I'm just steering you kind of toward those kinds of resources. And I'll talk more about talking to other people and getting their opinion, people who've gone to grad school, like our panelists, right? So specialized knowledge, it might be a passion area, you know, and it gives you that specialized knowledge that you really need to break into, or to really continue in that field of interest for you, right? Sometimes you get to a certain level where it's really hard to move up without either a master's or, you know, certain specialized experience. And so you can get that oftentimes with a master's. It can facilitate career change, as I was just really alluding to even earlier. If you want to get into a different area, right? And all of your experience is in one field and you want to break out of that, getting a master's can get you that additional, you know, that more experience, and kind of, you usually do projects and things and practicums. You might do those kinds of things that give you more meat, if you will, that's related to what you want to do than your former career that you may not be interested in anymore. And it's, like I said, it's required for some fields. And then for some people, it's a goal attainment. It's like, I want to, you know, the specialized learning that they just want to do it. And that's fine if they have the money, or if it's not, you know what I mean? But it's an expensive endeavor. And so it can be difficult if you are in any kind of, if you have any kind of issue with that. So the cons of pursuing grad school. Expensive, you know, I'm going to have the panelists actually talk a little bit about, you know, their debt, right, or just how they handle debt, because I think that's one of the biggest things that is most daunting for people as they're even thinking about grad school. It's like, oh, I don't want to take out that many loans, and so I definitely will ask the panelists to speak on that in a moment. But it takes time. I mean, and the panelists will share their own, you know, their own experience, how long it took them, that kind of thing, or where they are in their grad program. But it can take a lot of time and money, right? So the return on investments can be kind of slow too. It's not like you graduate and then instantly you're going to get this huge increase. I mean, it may qualify you for other jobs and such, but it can take some time to get those. So it's not a very good, I'm not sure what else to do with my life right now. I guess I'll go to grad school. That ends up being, and some people do that, and I get that. And I know that there's, you know, sometimes when you're in a recession, you know, some will recommend, well, it's good to maybe think about, you know, getting your graduate degree, or, you know, and that's true. If maybe you've been laid off and then, you know what you want to study. But I caution people against just that, looking to it as the end all solve it, like, well, I don't know what else to do, so I guess I'll go to grad school, because that could just saddle you with a lot of extra debt and such. So I want to stop at this point and just ask our panelists if they have any, you know, if they care to share anything about their own, like, you know, when they were weighing the pros and cons, and you know, how you made the decision that you did. So any of you. And you're all muted right now, but I know that you'll take yourselves off when you want to chat.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in really quick. As I mentioned, I chose the route of going part-time or working full-time. And, you know, I did a lot of analysis. Do I do a full-time master's in social work program at UCLA? Do I do the part-time program at USC? Do I go to Cal State Long Beach, which would be cheaper, but maybe not as well known? And so I looked at everything, and it just made the most sense. I was able to keep my job. They let me work full-time, do internships, and go to school part-time, and they paid for 2/3 of my education. So it really made it easy. You know, and I looked at other factors, right? So some of the things for me were, well, what about the types of internships could I get? Could I get the competitive ones? Could I get what I wanted? And
Right.
the reality was, you know, I'm pretty good at networking, so I knew I had the strength, so I was able to get what I wanted, but I went out of my way, because traditionally those would go to students who normally would work or would go to school full time. So you kind of just have to lay it all out and kind of look at it. It made a lot of sense for me. I walked away with probably, I think my debt was less than $10,000. It was like $7,000.
Oh, wow, that's incredible.
2008, before tuitions went up a lot. But you also have to look like a social work degree. I love social work and will always advocate for it. I was heavily involved in the National Association of Social Workers. It doesn't pay a lot. So, or they don't typically pay a lot unless you do traditional, non-traditional social work. So those are things you just want to think about. If you go to an Ivy League, if you go to a USC that's really expensive, it's got a good payoff in the jobs, but are you going to make up that money? So those are some of the things that I thought about.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else want to share their own experience? And we have plenty of time to share, so if we can certainly go on, that's okay too.
So for me, it was a little different because I participated in the Master's International program with Peace Corps. So I was in grad school at the time I decided to join service. But I know you have at least one thing working for you if you decide to go to grad school, is the Coverdale Fellows Program, to where you can apply for assistantship, I guess you can call it, for a grad program at a list of graduate schools. So that's one thing that's working in your favor, having served as a Peace Corps volunteer, and that's always available for you. It was definitely a major decision. I came out with a lot of debt, sadly, but I also spent a year in Holland and studied over there. So I look back on my experience in grad school, and I do not regret a single dollar that I spent on my education, because one, I was able to, and sorry for all the noise and wind and everything, but for one, I was able to finish with a degree. So you have to make it worthwhile, right? Make it worth your effort, your time, and your money to spend on such an endeavor. But then also the experiences. It's so much that I just can't put a dollar figure to, that I gained so much from it. So you at least you have the assistantship program if you don't have anything else. Like Dustin, he had other scholarships and such, but at least you have that to help you with pay for your education. And everything else, you just have to weigh your commitment level and what's most important to you. I will say, and this is just me being completely honest, and from my experience, it's not the same across the board. It is not easy out here right now. It is not easy. And it's not to say it's impossible, but it's not easy. And to have grad school as an option to kind of help prepare you for that career, whatever that next move is for you, as far as what you want to be when you grow up, right? I think going to grad school is a good option for right now, especially with the way the market is, and how you have Coverdale as an option, and then really gain that skill to help upward mobility is what I see a graduate education helping with. Not necessarily get through the door, but if you're looking for a promotion, you're more than likely going to have to have a degree, a master's degree or higher, to help you get to the next level.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I really appreciate that. I've taken myself off camera because my video was stalling, and I'm trying to minimize things to make sure I can get through the hour without some system crash or something. So you won't be looking at my face, but this is me. And let's go ahead and continue on, and then we'll get some more insight from folks. So when you really look at when you're picking what degree you're going to study, I think that the program that you're going to study, I was looking at the chat box, and there's several people who indicated, I'm just not sure of what I should study, or how do you pick that? And I guess Victoria, if you want to start and share, how did you pick your program? What was your choice process like?
Yeah, this was a really hard decision for me, because I was trying to, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. My bachelor's was in journalism, print journalism, which I loved, but Peace Corps, completely changed my life, changed, a lot of what I thought I wanted to do. Not that it doesn't use those skills, but I was like, okay, how do I get to work internationally? I'm interested in mental health. I'm interested in social work, but I also want to work I want to work internationally. I want to look at the bigger picture. I started talking to Peace Corps staff, a lot of whom had masters in public health, and some of our Peace Corps response volunteers who already had their masters. I talked to them. I talked to basically anybody that would listen. I looked at the Coverdell programs that were offered as well, and any ones that sounded interesting or were remotely related. I actually found, this sounds a little nutty, but I found the alumni lists on websites for those schools, and I emailed people, and they were totally cool with talking to me about it. So I had people straight up be like, that's too much money. My program, it was great, but you don't need to pay that much money. Don't worry about that, So, and I ended up deciding about my dual program through talking to a lot of people with MSWs and MPHs. And ultimately, a lot of people said, this was the people that I talked to, that if I wanted to do that mental health and social work related work on an international scale, it would be a little bit easier with the dual masters. So then I just started looking into which programs were the cheapest, which dual program, of the dual program options. And the one I applied to several, but the one that ultimately offered the most money was University of Denver and University of Colorado. For me, initially, University of Denver, it's private, so it was expensive. They did offer me a decent amount of money and the Peace Corps Fellowship Program as well. University of Colorado initially did not offer me very much money. I called the program, the department head of the program that I was interested in, and we were just talking, and she ended up talking to her superiors and getting me a little scholarship for that program, which was population mental health. So, and then I decided to defer. This is a long story, but I decided to defer because ultimately I kind of wanted to, if possible, get in-state tuition in addition to those scholarships. And I asked them if that was okay. I asked the University of Denver. They said, yes, send in your deposit. We'll hold your scholarships. We'll hold your fellowships. And then this gives me the opportunity to do some work that's not Peace Corps, because this would be my first non-Peace Corps job that's somewhat hopefully related to the field that I'm interested in. And then who knows, maybe I'll have more money, maybe I'll have more options, I'll have a little bit more time to apply for scholarships. And yes, that's my whole thing right there.
Thank you, Victoria. And I think that's such a good perspective. And that's why I was so glad you were going to be able to be on this. Somebody who thinks you're thinking ahead to, okay, how can I limit the amount of debt I'm going to have? I can establish my residency while I'm, and defer it for a year. People don't always think that that's an option. So thank you for that. I'm sure that I'm wondering, the other folks here, our panelists, when you look at this list, I just have a list here of some of the things to do some of the steps to take when you're choosing, a degree, right? Obviously doing your research, right? Don't just pick a degree because it sounds interesting or it sounds like, ooh, impressive, that would be great. Really do your research and talk. Not only, look online. You can look at a lot of sources to get information on, what kinds of jobs, that, leads to talking to people and professionals that are out there. And this is where the networking comes in, right? Using LinkedIn, finding other Peace Corps volunteers, right? We have whole sessions on how to use LinkedIn. So I'm not going to go into it here, but you can connect with and look for people who worked for Peace Corps in the past, right? And currently work in this industry or at this, institution or things like that. And you can connect with people who actually are working in that area so that you can hear from people who've gotten the degree, right? Or are working in that field to get, their advice on how important is it to go to a name school versus, getting the degree and different things like that, right? And it depends based on, the program oftentimes, right? And so that's all really important as you choose not only the program you want to study, but where to study it. Do you want to study it somewhere where, if you're really interested in working for CDC, you might want to study public health at Emory. That was on our earlier call that we did on this. And one of the panelists, shared that it's right in the backyard of CDC. So they have a lot of intern programs and, kind of work types of programs. So you can get that experience from them. So that might be a great place to go if you're interested in CDC. So it depends on the programs and all of that, the schools. all of that. But doing the career chats, which I think is just a better way to approach it than saying, an informational interview, because that sounds so long and doesn't roll off your tongue. So, wondering if you might have 15, 20 minutes of your time to chat with me a little bit about your own experience and tips and advice you might have for someone such as me considering a degree in this field. People generally love to talk. And right now in COVID-19, we are desperate to talk. I think extroverts are like going, it's really hard to be in, and not be able to, get out and spend time. So people tend to have even more time available now. So, also taking into consideration your strengths. What are your natural strengths before you choose a master's program? I mean, do you really want to do an IT type of thing? If really, you don't really enjoy, that kind of field? Obviously not, but sometimes it's not that obvious. You might think the degree sounds great, but when you get into it more and you talk to more people, there's a lot of stats and there's a lot of, okay. Ooh, sorry, my computer almost died there, I think. I don't know what's happening here, but it's plugged in, so I'm not sure, but I'm with you still. So those are the things to take, and then look at, smart finances, like limiting your debt, to try to limit it. And you panelists have all shared with us some ways that you did, whether it was the Coverdell or special scholarships that you got, things like that. Trying to limit your debt is really important. And then lastly, consulting, the Occupational Outlook Handbook. If anyone's heard of that, just do a Google search and you can access it. That's where you can find a lot out about what kinds of jobs require what kinds of degrees, what kinds of jobs pay certain amounts with a degree, without a degree, the outlook for whatever, jobs you're interested in having. It's a very good source, and it's put out by BLM or it's not, no, not BLM. It's not DOL. I thought it was DOL. It's Bureau of Management, and it's one of the many federal agencies. But if you just do
maybe or something like that,
labor stats or something, Bureau of Labor, something labor stats or something, yeah. Anyway, so do a Google search for Occupational Outlook Handbook, and you can learn a lot more online now, which is great, about all those things. It's all accessible. So let's talk just briefly, from folks, the cost benefit analysis, right? So you've seen the pros, you've seen the cons, you've seen some of the things that you take into consideration when you're choosing your degree. How, if you can speak to how you made that decision, or also going back to, how you chose your degree for those that didn't get to share yet. Either of those is just fine. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit on this. And then I'm going to be looking at the chat box to see if there are specific questions. If any of you in the audience have particular questions for one of the panelists, just put their name in the chat box first and then your question, and I'll ask them while they're not, speaking. They can look through a little bit too and perhaps, connect with you and answer maybe your question there for all to learn from. So if anyone else wants to talk about, how you made that decision of what your program or your school was, or that cost benefit analysis, feel free to right now. And then we're almost to the point where we're just going to take general questions. So if you haven't started putting your questions in, please do so now, so that we can certainly address as many as possible. And if you have one for a specific person, like I said, put their name in as well. So let's see. So you so we have in the chat box, we have Clay is asking, he's considering grad school, he says, for environmental management, but he's leaning toward finding employment as master's programs may look different with the pandemic, and also a bit concerned about the current experience. Any insight that any of you would care to share with Clay and the rest on that?
Judy, ask the question again, sorry.
Sure, no problem. Clay indicated, he says he's considering, he served in Panama and just finished, and considering grad school for environmental management, but he's leaning toward finding employment as the master's programs may look very different with the pandemic, and also a bit concerned about the current experience. So just, like he's considering grad school or employment. He's kind of in that. What are some tips or advice you would have for him on helping him to make that decision? It's obviously a very individual one, but.
Yeah, Jody, could I add a little bit to that statement too?
Sure, is this Clay?
Yeah, hey, this is
Great.
Clay.
Hi, Clay, thank you.
Hey there. Hey, so yes, so right now with the pandemic, I guess I'm, my concern is just what would master's programs look like, and I think there's some uncertainty with how they'll play out. If students will be on campus or if it'll be a lot of remote learning, and just how that might affect your ability to network. And also, my concern about experience is specifically about like work experience. So a lot of it seems like, since a master's is such a big decision, it seems like you'd want to be really sure about like what you want to get a master's in. And so I guess I'm thinking that it'd be really good if I'm uncertain about how much relevant work experience I have, to get more of it, to know for sure that, okay, I do want to get a master's in this field. Thanks, Jody.
Yeah, thank you. Any of you care to share with him maybe any thoughts that you might have on that? Grad school versus work. It's such a hard choice.
About your experience, I think you're kind of going through that right now, trying to make that decision.
Who's that?
Oh, me, Victoria, I don't know if you said me, but yes, man, Clay, I feel like I completely, that's completely my life story too. But I think that was also something I was thinking about as, we started locking things down because of coronavirus. I also was concerned about that, and I wanted to make sure, with grad school, I had to have an internship right away, and like, I was definitely thinking about that too. And for me personally, I don't have a ton of experience related to social work and public health. Peace Corps, yes, I did projects, I did some great things. And I think one of the other benefits for me personally with deferring for a year is like, this is kind of like my last chance to really think about it and make sure like this is what you want to do. And that's why I'm really hoping to get a job at least somewhat related to those fields. So I'm still doing that networking thing too, trying to make some connections for these programs and things I'm interested in. Because I think that that's a good way to go about it, if you're not entirely sure, or so for me, it makes sense. If you're not sure, you're worried about, what it's going to look like. I mean, if you can find a job, I think it depends on what you want to go through. Like for me, I'm now in the thick of like job hunting, which I'm not going to say is my favorite thing. But it's necessary. And I'm hoping that at the end of it, I'll, who knows what kind of connections I'm going to make that could help me in the future, save some money, and then really hopefully be sure that like, this is definitely what I want to do and spend my money and time doing. So yeah, that's just my thought process.
Great. Wonderful. So we have some more questions coming in, which is great. And I think what we'll do for timing, I'm going to go we'll go to the next here, finance and your graduate degree, because we're kind of already talking about that. And that's one of the big, I think, concerns that everyone has, right? So we've already talked a little bit about, the Peace Corps Fellows Program, that some mentioned. The MI program, the Masters International, is no longer available, sadly, and someone in the comments did say, gosh, we wish they would, bring that back. Me too. I actually went through the MI program myself years back in the 90s. And I was at headquarters when they did do away with that. I was not in the area, and I don't know, Dustin, if you have more insight, but I remember part of the issue was it was very difficult. Like, it's easier to, like, for the fellows program, you come back, right, and you get the fellows program, you get this fellowship kind of whatever. With the Masters International program, you would do it, but do some grad school before you left, then you'd go to Peace Corps, and you'd be doing something while you were there and reporting back. And it was very hard, I think, to monitor and to have that be equal access around the world because of the different Peace Corps posts. So I think it was it was much more, a much more labor intensive one, I think, in some ways. I'm not justifying, like I said, I would rather have it back still too, but I think that might have led into some of it. But there are obviously grad, assistantships, TA, opportunities, where that does give some, benefit, right, as well. Sometimes for those of you who are working, sometimes employers will pay for part of your grad school, or they'll allow you to leave early, one day or a couple days or whatever, to help you on that regard. And then there are part-time programs, which is what, Dustin, that's what you did, right? So doing that part-time while you're working full-time, now that is that is not an easy thing to do. And I've known many people who've done it, and it is like, it's stressful, but it can be done. And, you know, it's definitely something to consider as well. And then, you know, when I say other, I say like leverage your Peace Corps service. And I think one of the panelists actually said, maybe it was you, Victoria, that, you know, mention your Peace Corps service, right? But wherever you can, mention your Peace Corps service. And the way that you do it when you're talking grad programs or any kind of, you know, higher ed, is you phrase it when you're doing, you know, like informational interviews, or you're talking to people or whatever, and maybe they give you your benefit package, and you might go back and say, you know, some institutions, you know, many institutions recognize the value of the Peace Corps, you know, the value and quality of service for the international blah, 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 with special rewards, you know, academic, you know, special scholarships and financial assistance. What, if any, such programs does your institution offer? I can tell you, if you're talking to one of the professors and such, or whoever's there, they don't want to be outdone by other schools. So they might be like, well, let me check. And, you know, you might get more. I'm not saying guaranteed, but you might. So be creative about those kinds of things as well, and try to work your Peace Corps experience for as much as you can, because it is valuable and it is worth something, and should be compensated in my mind. So at this point, I think we're actually at the question. So I really want to get to the chat box here. I want to open this up more and just see what we have in here. So if you have specific questions, like we said, drop them in there. If they're for specific people, put their name first of the panelists, and we can go from there. But I'm just looking. Let's see. Oh, congratulations, Chloe, who indicated that from Ukraine. An evacuee who was accepted into a master's program abroad, and I'm thinking of deferring, has a tentative offer in DC, so doing the security clearance. Wonderful. Good for you. Let's see. Yeah, Katrina mentions, was in Malawi until 2019, accepted into 3 schools, but not sure with the current situation if I'll start in the fall. I mean, I guess that's something right now with COVID-19 and all of that, and the impacts on schools. It really makes a difference, I think, you know, in terms of, you know, are you going to want to start? Is that a good time? Maybe it is a good time. Maybe it's, you don't even know what it's going to look like in the fall. Is it going to be online like it has been this spring? You know, and then that's hard. Yeah, that's a really hard decision, I think, as well. So let's see, we have some questions here. There was one for Dustin about here it was, Dustin, how is the process of getting a federal job with an MSW? I have a BSW and been thinking about that, of doing an MSW, but I would not want to double my degree knowledge. I'm thinking of going for an international affairs program since I'm very passionate about human rights.
So Emanuel, great question. Thank you for asking. Nice to meet you as well. Thanks for joining today. Yeah, a lot of thoughts on that. I think I'm going to jump to the second part of your question, though. I think you're spot on. I know a lot of BSWs, and for everybody else, a BSW is a Bachelor in Social Work, and MSW is a Master's in Social Work. I agree with you. I think it's probably wise for you to diversify your background. So I think you said it, international affairs, there's a lot of great programs. You know, you talk about human rights, so maybe law might be something that's appropriate for you. I think public health could be something that you could do. So those are all things that I would encourage you to do research on and kind of make connections to see, you know, what's in line with social work, because it sounds like you have those fundamentals, but that really kind of get you to where you want to be career-wise. As far as leveraging my MSW to get a federal job, look, you have NCE, or hopefully you have NCE, assuming you finished in the last year. That's going to get you your federal job, right? So that your Peace Corps experience, what you did, framing that's really what's going to get you that BSW, that bachelor's degree is going to help you. I did not have NCE. I actually got a job at consulting. I worked at Booz Allen, worked on healthcare.gov for a year, and then I kept applying and finally got a job in placement at Peace Corps. And so I just kept hammering down and kept hitting my contacts up, similar to what Victoria has done with her grad school degree, right? That networking. So, you know, I think that's kind of what I utilize. You know, a social work degree is very versatile. You can use it for many things. But at the end of the day, the NCE is probably, and Jody could speak to you about for hours on that, but that you get a Fed job if you want to do that. And I'm happy to talk with you more offline with more ideas on that. But I really like your second part. You're right. I think you should probably try to diversify that second degree if you can.
Great, great. And yes, NCE can be very effective. It's not a guarantee, but there's a lot of organizations that want to bring in people via NCE because A, they know the quality of RPCVs. You're great people. You're, resourceful, adaptable, all of those things, hard workers. So they love bringing in, candidates with NCE. So if you have that and have any interest in working in the federal government, work it. Right now, I don't know the exact number, but like within the last week or so, I was looking on the CareerLink site, and there were 790 jobs total. And of them, I think it was almost 300 or 350, something like that. It was a lot that were federal. And remember, that's just job posting. Oftentimes they post one vacancy and they're hiring multiple from it. So definitely that's something to if you're interested, and I'm happy to talk with people one-on-one about that as well. And I was also refer you to and I'll send it as a resource in our follow-up email. It's included in that as the Global Reentry YouTube playlist. We have a session on NCE. I don't know if you panelists know, but all of the evacuees, all of them, once they swore in as a volunteer, they all received the full NCE, which is great. And that was not what it was initially, but they worked for it, and it was great. So I'm really glad of that. I do have, and gosh, we have a couple more questions here, and I want to respect folks' time too. I know we got started a little bit late, but we have, there's a few other questions here. There's a generic question from Paige about finances for grad school. And she asks, what does quote unquote a lot of debt look like? I've found a program I'm interested in, but even with some scholarships, it still looks like coming up $20,000 short in total, including living costs and all. Is it better to work for a few years and save money, or take out loans and hope for better paying jobs post-grad school? Any of the panelists want to weigh in with that? Looking like at $20,000 total, including your housing and such. And your thoughts on that? I mean, it's
I'll take a stab at
sure,
it.
thanks, Stephanie.
Paige, that's a very difficult question, and there's no just right or wrong, black or white answer to it. There's so many things you have to consider. What makes $20,000 worth it for you? You have to weigh, what is it that you want from that experience, and is it worth it for you to put in is it a 2-year program, or you just have to really just lay it all out on the table. I do a lot of visioning exercises, right? Looking at, where do I want to be at the end? How do I envision myself? Where do I see myself? What am I doing? And then the steps that get me there. And it's, how hard are you willing to work to get to where you want to be? And work can look financially, having to make a financial commitment. It could be a time commitment. It could be having to move away from family and friends. It could be having to work part-time to help pay off that debt. It can be so many things, but if it's truly what you want, how much sweat equity are you willing to put in that deal to get where you want to be? You just have to weigh it. And for me, I always chose my happiness above all, what it is I want out of life. And I was willing to go that extra mile to get me there, whatever it was. And I was going to make sure I got there, because it's hard. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. So you have to keep yourself motivated. You have to do the networking. You have to be a part of groups. You have to be flexible. And whatever that is, the moving or the working another job. While I was in grad school, I did Master's International, but you don't start until after a year or a semester. I think it's a semester. But I was working during that time while I was in school to help pay back my loans and to help support myself while I was in school. And this was out of state, and I was paying out of state tuition as well. But to me, it was worth it. I would be able to join the Peace Corps and have my degree, but then my service was related to what I was studying as well. To me, that was worth the amount of money I had to pay to get that.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. That was very, very good. We appreciate that. There's another question that says from Kyle asking, and it's kind of related, what are the trade-offs of attending grad school part-time versus full-time?
And yeah, I'll jump in real quick if you don't mind, Jody. Yeah, so Kyle, very good question. There are definitely trade-offs, and I think Jody alluded to them earlier. I mean, I think I always like to start with the positives. The positives are you can find other ways to pay for it. You're working full-time. You're very efficient with your time because you have to be. You're around a lot of professional experience. Like a lot of your professors are working professionals as well. So it's not to say that professors in the full-time programs aren't, but they tend to have more working experience. So in social work, that's definitely a benefit. It's a way to help pay for it. A lot of times your work will help pay for it. But some of the trade-offs, one of the great things that I saw a lot of my friends and my colleagues go through is they had a whole cohort of people they went through grad school with. And you have that in part-time programs, but typically those people have kids, they have families. So they're with schools, they minimize how much they're with school because they have a family, they have a job, they have other things. Where when you go to full-time grad school, you get that support, you get probably more networking opportunities. There's just a lot of things that can be said about that experience. Now you have to ask yourself, as Stephanie was saying, like, is it worth that cost? Is it worth those things? But there are definitely trade-offs. And I think those are some of the biggest ones. Also, your life does suffer a little in that the social life, like you're very focused on, you're working, you're going to school, you might have an internship, you got tests, you're studying, you are pretty focused in. Yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts. And feel free to email me, Kyle, if you have more questions on that. I'm happy to answer them. But I looked at that very closely before deciding, and then when I was going through it, I have a lot of thoughts on it.
Great. And we will wrap up here in just a few minutes to respect everyone's time, the panelists and such as well. But if you don't mind, panelists, to drop in to the chat box, either your LinkedIn connect, so people can maybe connect with you if they do have follow-up questions. We're all one big happy family, and I put my information in there. My career's at peacecorpsconnect.org too. But I was looking in the chat box and seeing it talked a little bit. There were a couple comments that I want to just address. There was one about, I believe you can find affiliate groups for your country of service. You absolutely can through NPCA. If you visit peacecorpsconnect.org, you'll be able to find that through there easily. The affiliate groups, you can just do it in the search tool or whatnot. But yeah, you can do that. And then someone else had alluded, they said something in here that made me think there was an earlier conversation maybe in the chat box that I missed. It says Peace Corps can be catered on your resume as a work experience. Absolutely, Andrew. It not only can, but it should be catered as a full-on work experience, professional experience. I like the category, the title instead of work experience. I like the header to read professional experience. I just feel it sounds more professional, and Peace Corps absolutely is in there. So try to include it there. And if you have any questions about that, let me know. It's you focus on things like the accomplishments you were able to make, and sometimes you can't see the value right away. So maybe maybe you wrote a grant for a $2,000 grant, but it wasn't implemented. Well, you still wrote it. So take credit for what happened, and the things that you did, put the numbers in there, and talking about your service can be really, I think you can really spin it in many different ways because you gain so many transferable skills from your Peace Corps service. And clearly, those of you who were just evacuated, I mean, that's a resiliency beyond the norm, and people all want to help you. I mean, I had so many people reaching out to me knowing my connection to Peace Corps, saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe all the countries are closing, what can people do to help? This is terrible. I mean, really, people want to help, and so let them. Absolutely. So any other final questions? I'm just looking here. Yep, thank you for putting your information into the chat box. Just a reminder to everyone, make sure that you save the chat box before you leave, before you end out. Just go to the chat box, and on the very bottom, you'll see the 3 dots inside a little square. Click on that and click Save Chat, and that way it'll save it to your laptop. For example, there's a Zoom, I guess you'll have a Zoom folder, and so that you can refer to it in the future. Otherwise, you don't have access to that part afterwards. You will be able to see the recording, but yeah, so just a suggestion for all of you there. Any final thoughts any of you panelists want to make to folks before we do wrap up here? For folks who are considering grad school?
Yeah,
yes.
There's one thing that's constantly come to my mind as I'm hearing the questions and the concerns about what what degree do I seek? What do I study? Your degree does not define you. It makes you look good. It helps you to look good on paper, but it's not in total who you are. And through your career journey, I know through mine, you will find yourself doing many different things. And especially with how we operate now, there's no such thing as working one job for 10, 15 years like many of our parents, maybe grandparents did.
Mhm.
It's very rare that that happens. And it's because we have so many different interests and there's many different opportunities and so many different factors that come into play over time, such as COVID-19, right? Where jobs that were really hot, maybe, before all of this happened, it has completely changed because of the pandemic. The job sectors, what companies are looking for is a lot different. They're really trying to figure out what that is, but then also they know what they need, what their needs were before is not what it is today. So I know that just makes the decision even harder to choose one specific degree, but know that it doesn't lock you into one thing for the rest of your life. That's not the case. It's just one step to many more choices you will have to make throughout your career journey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate those words. And I think on that note, to respect folks' time, I do want to bring this to a close. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your experience with graduate school, how you made those difficult decisions. Thank you for those of you who tuned in. We really appreciate you spending time with us here tonight. We will have a follow-up email that will go out to you that will include some of the resources and additional resources and things. But again, make sure that you copy that chat box if you're interested in that, in those resources there. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll hope to see you here for some other events. We have our podcast kicking off tomorrow at noon. It's the Jobs with Jody podcast that we're going to kind of get insight from all of you, and then we're going to actually do a lot of different things on that. We have tomorrow, I know DevX has a how to get a job in COVID-19 era that starts at 12:30. And these are all on our calendar. If you go to peacecorpsconnect.org/events, you'll see all of them there. But there's also USAID is doing an open house. RPCVs at AID, which is the group of RPCVs at USAID, they're doing an open house, going to answer questions and things like that. That's, I think, at 3 tomorrow. There's so many events tomorrow. It's crazy. So lots of things coming up, and then unpacking your Peace Corps service we're going to be doing with SIT, which is one of the institutions that is very pro Peace Corps and has a lot of fellows programs and things like that too. So you might tune into that on, I think it's Thursday. So check out the events calendar for information, and thank you again to everyone for coming, and we will look forward to seeing you here some other time. Okay. All right. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming and sharing time with us.